For years, I ate every meal with my phone in my hand. I told myself I was busy, that slowing down was a luxury I couldn't afford, because sitting quietly with just a bowl of food felt strangely unbearable, empty, almost. Then I came across a single line from the Buddha, something so simple, it almost sounds like nothing, but it changed the way I eat, the way I breathe, the way I move through a day. It reminded me that quiet doesn't arrive all at once. It builds, slowly, one small moment at a time. Today, that line is for you. Before dawn in India, the forest near Gaya was still wrapped in darkness, and river mist drifted slowly through the trees. On the bank of the Naranjara River, there stood a single tree, the one that would later be called the Bodhi tree. Beneath it, a man sat in silence. The first light of morning began to filter through the branches, one thin beam at a time. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. A woman approached. She was carrying a bowl. A thin thread of steam rose from it into the cold morning air. The sweet scent of milk porridge drifted toward him. What happened on that morning and what was living inside that bowl, that's where I'd like to begin today. Her name was Sujata. She had cooked through the night, tending the fire with careful hands, not knowing exactly who would receive her offering, only that someone should. She had made a vow, and the porridge was its fulfillment. Some say she mistook him for a tree spirit. Others say she simply saw a man who looked as though he had been waiting a very long time. Let me take you back to just before the Buddha's awakening. Years had passed since he left home. Born a prince, raised in every comfort imaginable. And yet the question that wouldn't leave him, that ache called suffering, drove him to walk away from the palace. At first, he threw himself into the harshest forms of asceticism known in India at the time. He cut back his eating to almost nothing. He denied sleep. He punished his body, believing that if he could just push through enough pain, the truth would finally reveal itself. For years, his ribs became visible through his skin. And yet, no matter how much he endured, what he was searching for stayed out of reach. His body was failing, but the fog in his mind never cleared. One day, he waded into the river to wash himself. When he climbed back to the bank, he couldn't stand. Years of self-denial had taken everything from his legs. He simply sat down on the earth. That's when she appeared. A young woman from a nearby village named Sujata. She had come that morning to offer milk porridge to the spirit of the tree. Rice simmered slowly in sweet warm milk. She saw the man sitting by the water and walked toward him. She held out the bowl. "Please," she said, "take this." He received it with both hands. For so long he had believed that eating was an obstacle to awakening, that giving in to the body's hunger was a form of weakness. He had kept food at a distance, as something to be overcome. But now, holding this bowl, something shifted. The warmth moved through his palms. The sweet smell of milk rose toward him. This porridge, prepared with care, carried here by a stranger, was now resting in his hands. He brought it to his lips. One sip, it was warm. Simply, completely warm. And something that had been locked tight inside him for years began, slowly, to loosen, as though the cold knot of all those years of striving was quietly dissolving into that single bowl. After he finished, he walked to the Bodhi tree and sat down. He made a silent vow not to rise until he had found what he was looking for. That night, it said, he awakened. What years of extreme practice had not reached, a bowl of warm porridge seemed to open the door to. Was that a coincidence, or was something already living inside that bowl? Sujata later visited the community of monks and spoke to them. She said, "That morning, I had only meant to make an offering to the tree spirit, but when that man received what I brought, I felt something fill up inside me too. It wasn't only the one who ate who was changed. The one who gave received something as well." What was that porridge really? It was not medicine. It was not magic. It was simply one person seeing another, cold, empty, at the edge of collapse, and moving toward him anyway. And perhaps that is where the teaching lives, not in the years of straining and enduring, but in that unremarkable morning walk to a river, a bowl warm in the hands, two strangers briefly holding the same moment together. Sujata did not know she was feeding a future Buddha. You might be thinking, eating is just eating. It's how we get nutrients. I'm not sure there's anything deeper in it. That's an honest reaction, and I don't want to argue with it. But sit with this for a moment. We eat every day, morning, noon, and night, sometimes a snack in between. And yet when we look back on a meal we had just hours ago, we often can't quite remember it. What did it taste like? Was it warm? We're not sure. Maybe we were scrolling through our phones. Maybe the TV was on. Maybe we were rehearsing an argument in our heads while moving our chopsticks on autopilot. Eating and feeling have become two separate things. Here's a question Buddhism would ask. When we finish a meal and still feel vaguely unsatisfied, like something's missing, is that because we didn't eat enough? Buddhism offers a different answer. We weren't empty because we ate too little. We were empty because in a real sense, we didn't eat at all. Our mouths moved, our stomachs filled, but the experience of eating, of actually being there for it, had vanished somewhere. This is one pattern that Buddhist teachings point to as a root of suffering. The dissatisfaction we feel at the table isn't a problem with the food. It comes from being present in body, but absent in mind, from being here without being here. Now think back to that morning by the river. When the man received that bowl, he was entirely there. He felt the warmth through his palms. He breathed in the scent. He tasted it on his tongue. And somewhere in that simple act, he seemed to feel, without thinking it through, how much had converged to make this one bowl possible. A young woman who rose early and worked with care. The rice, grown in soil fed by rain and sunlight. The cow that gave the milk, grazing on grass. And the quiet chance that brought Sujata to that particular riverbank on that particular morning. A single bowl of porridge, carrying within it an uncountable number of lives, hands, and hours. Let me offer a small shift in perspective. We tend to think, I am eating. But what if it's the other way around? What if eating is actually the world entering you, the soil and water and light and someone else's hands dissolving into who you are? Not I eat, but the world becomes me. When you see it that way, the meal looks completely different. All those years of asceticism, the man by the river had believed that denying the body's needs was the path forward. But what he discovered in the moment before his awakening was something else entirely. It wasn't about suppressing desire or surrendering to it. It was about being fully present with what was actually happening. This is what Buddhism calls the middle way, and its most ordinary expression might be as simple as this. Just be here while you eat. That alone can turn a meal into something close to practice. A monk I once heard about kept a small stone on his dinner table, nothing special, just a gray pebble from a garden path. Before each meal, he would place it in his palm, feel its weight, and let that brief moment of texture and coolness draw him back into his body. He never explained it to his students. He just picked it up, set it down, and began to eat. Let's bring this into the rhythm of everyday life. Yours, mine, the kind we all actually live. First scene, a busy weekday lunch. You open your bento box at your desk, one hand already reaching for your phone to check messages. You finish in 5 minutes and go straight back to work. 10 minutes later, someone asks what you had for lunch, and you have to stop and think. Your stomach is full, you got your calories, but something feels off. What's missing isn't food, it's the experience of having eaten. Your body was at the table, but you weren't. You were somewhere else. A task, a reply you needed to write, a plan forming for later that evening. The meal happened, but you weren't there for it. Feeling unsatisfied after eating isn't always a food problem. Sometimes it's an absence problem. Second scene, a quiet evening at home, eating alone, no one to talk to. The TV murmurs in the background. You move through the meal in silence, and somewhere in that silence, a soft heaviness settles in. Something about eating by yourself feels lonely. But try this. Look at what's in front of you and ask, how many hands were involved in getting this plate to your table? Someone grew what's on it. Someone transported it. Someone processed or packaged it. Maybe someone cooked it. If you bought it at a supermarket, someone stocked the shelf. You thought you were eating alone, but the table you're sitting at was built by countless people who will never know your name. In Buddhism, this is called dependent origination, the teaching that nothing exists in isolation. Everything arises through connection. That meal that seemed lonely, it was never made by one person. It's a small crystallization of an enormous web. When you see it that way, even a solitary dinner can feel less like absence and more like belonging. Some of you may carry a memory from childhood, saying, "I don't like this," about something a parent made with care. Or the reverse, you cooked for someone you loved, and they barely noticed. A meal is never just calories. Someone's time is in it. Someone's feeling is in it. To eat without noticing is to let all of that pass through without being received. When the man by the river took that bowl with both hands, he received everything it carried: the warmth, the care, the chance encounter that made it possible. Eating and feeling were one. That's not a gift reserved for ancient seekers. It's available at your table today. So the next time you sit down to eat, even at your desk, even alone, even with a meal you didn't choose, try receiving it the way he received that bowl. Not with ceremony, not with effort, just with the small, deliberate act of being there. 2 hands if you can manage it. 1 full breath before the first bite. The meal hasn't changed, but you have arrived for it. And sometimes, that arrival is the whole practice. Not the cushion, not the chant, but the moment you look down at an ordinary plate and realize you chose to be present for it. The monk didn't find awakening on a mountain. He found it at the water's edge, holding something warm, with someone who didn't even know they were teaching him. Here's one small thing to try, just for today. Nothing complicated, no special equipment, no extra time needed. Choose one meal today, ideally the one where you're least rushed, maybe dinner, maybe a slow weekend breakfast. Before you take the first bite, pause, just for a moment. Look at what's in front of you. Actually look, notice the color, the shape. Then bring it close and take in the smell, slowly, once. When you put it in your mouth, notice the temperature. Follow the taste as it spreads across your tongue. Just for a few seconds. That's it, 1 bite. After that, eat however you normally would. This is actually rooted in something the early monks practiced. When they received food on their morning alms rounds, they were trained to eat with a quiet awareness, noticing where the food came from, how many hands had touched it, what it cost the world to reach them. Not as a ritual, not as a performance, just as a way of not switching off while they ate. You may find it hard at first. A thought will come and pull you away after 3 seconds. That's fine. When you notice you've drifted, just come back. The returning is already the practice. I won't promise this will transform your life. I won't say it solves anything, but it might give you, once a day, in the space of 1 bite, a small, genuine sense of being here, of having actually eaten. And that small thing, over time, has a quiet way of adding up. A monk once told me that after 20 years of eating in silence, he still got distracted sometimes. Still found himself halfway through a bowl of rice, thinking about a letter he needed to write. But then he'd look down at what remained, take 1 careful spoonful, and that was enough. The meal hadn't been wasted. 1 moment of return had honored the whole thing. That story has stayed with me for years, not because it's dramatic, but because it asks so little. Just 1 spoonful, just once. A woman at a retreat I led some years ago told me something similar. She'd spent most of a holiday dinner mentally rehearsing an argument with her sister, and then, almost by accident, she tasted a piece of roasted sweet potato, really tasted it, and felt briefly the warmth of the kitchen and the effort her mother had made. She said nothing changed about the argument, but something about that 1 moment made the rest of the evening softer. When was the last time you felt like you truly ate something? Not just consumed it, but tasted it, felt its warmth, stayed with it for a moment. If a memory comes to mind, I'm curious, where were you? Who, if anyone, was with you? What were you eating? Take your time. There's no right answer. Just let the memory come if it wants to. A grandmother's kitchen on a cold morning. The smell of something simmering before you even opened the door. You weren't thinking about yesterday or tomorrow. You were just there, small and warm and held by something you couldn't name. That is what presence feels like. Not a technique, not an achievement, but a bowl of soup that asks nothing of you except that you receive it. A monk I once knew said he spent 15 years learning to meditate, and then one afternoon, his teacher handed him a tangerine, and everything he had been chasing finally caught up with him. He peeled it slowly, and for the first time in years he wept, not from sadness, but because he had forgotten how much was already here. If today's practice of eating as meditation resonates with you, we explored the very same art of turning everyday tasks into practice through the simple act of washing dishes in an earlier teaching. That morning by the river, a young woman handing a bowl of warm porridge to a man who had almost nothing left has traveled more than 2,500 years to reach us here today. Eating is the most fundamental thing we do. We've been doing it since the moment we arrived in the world. We will do it tens of thousands of times in a lifetime. Of all those tens of thousands of meals, how many were we actually present for? No need to answer. Just let the question sit. And today, with one bite, try being there for it. The moment the world comes into you, the soil, the rain, the light, the hands of strangers, all of it crossing into you with a single swallow. In that moment, the line between the one who eats and the thing being eaten blurs just slightly. And in that slight blurring, there may be the faintest edge of what a man touched one morning under a tree. The morning everything changed. Thank you as always for being here today. I hope something on your table looks just a little different tonight. The rice in your bowl was not grown for you, and yet here it is. Perhaps that is what the woman by the river already knew. Pressing that warm bowl into a stranger's hands without a word of doctrine, without a single teaching. Only the simple, radical act of closing the distance between two people. That too is a kind of awakening. Hers was not a philosophy, it was a gesture. And gestures, it turns out, travel further than words. Tonight, try just one thing. A small step is enough. One story a day. In a week, your words will change. In a month, your eyes will change. In a year, the same world will look completely different.